Hello, this is Kirill from forexboat.com and welcome back to the course on money management. And today we're going to talk about a concept that's important for us to understand to go forward with this section, and that is that order doesn't matter. So in our approach to this game that we're playing with the heads and tails, it doesn't matter in which order heads and tails come up, and the result will always be the same. So we'll talk about that, but before we do continue, I wanted to say that even though we're looking at this game of heads and tails for now, it is only for simplicity purposes. We don't want to overcomplicate things by looking at a example of a specific trading strategy where you win 70% of the time, you lose 30% of the time. We'll do that towards the end of the section. For now, we're looking at just heads and tails because it takes away that complexity and allows us to focus on the money management part. But as you will see further down in this section, the same principles, exactly the same principles apply in trading. All right, so order doesn't matter. The fact is that in the long run, it doesn't matter in which order you get your heads and tails, and let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. So to start off with, let's say we have $100. We're betting 10% of our balance on every flip, and on the first flip we're betting $10. It's heads. We won $20 because we're still playing that game from the previous tutorial where we win. Every time we win twice our bet. Every time we lose, we only lose our bet. So now we've won $20. Our balance is $120. Now on the second bet, we're going to bet 10% of $120, which is $12. It's tails. We lost $12, so our balance is $108. So here you can see that as a result of a heads and tails, we got $108 on our account. By the way, you can already see that the result is different. Previously, when we bet 75%, our balance was less than our starting balance. Now our balance is greater than the starting balance. So there's a hint there for you that by changing the amount, the percentage that you bet, you can change the outcome. But we're not going to focus on that now. That's going to be discussed further in the tutorials. Right now we're looking at the order of the heads and tails. So let's see what happens if the order of these two tosses, or the results of these two tosses, is changed to the opposite. So let's say the first bet we bet $10. So we're starting this whole game again. We have $100 on our account. We bet $10, and the first one was tails. We lose $10, and now we have $90 on our account. Now on the second toss, we're betting $9, which is 10% of our current balance. It's heads, and we're going to win $18. And so now our balance is $108. So as you can see, in both cases, we've gone from $100 to $108. And it doesn't matter whether it was heads and then tails, or tails and then heads. So this was a simple example of when we only have two tosses. And now we know that in the case of two tosses, order doesn't matter. Why order doesn't matter is because every time you get heads, what you're doing is you're multiplying your current balance by 1.2. Every time you get tails, you're multiplying your current balance by 0.9. So if you had 100 and you get heads, your balance is now 120. So that's a coefficient of 1.2. If you get tails, your balance is 90, and that's a coefficient of 0.9. So therefore, when we have a lot of tosses, like in this example, we can just convert the tosses, or the results of the tosses, into multiplication. So if you had $100, then the first heads turns your $100 into $120. Then the next tails turns your $120 into $108. And that's pretty much just taking your $120 and multiplying it by 0.9. Then you get heads, that's another multiplication, and so on. So every time, depending on the result, you either multiply your current balance by 1.2 or 0.9. And because multiplication can be, like, you can move around elements in multiplication is basic math, we can move around these tosses. So with that previous picture or sequence of heads and tails will give you exactly the same result as this sequence. So first you go down 4 times, so you multiply by 0.9 4 times, and then you multiply by 1.2. And it'll give you exactly the same result as this sequence, where you first multiply by 1.2 and then by 0.9. So, and that tells us that order doesn't matter in the long run. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say that because heads and tails come with approximately the same frequency in the long term, so if you do 1,000,000 tosses, then half of them will be heads, approximately half of them will be heads, half of them will be tails. What we can do now is we can order them in the next fashion. We'll say heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, and so on. So we're just going to reorder them in a way that will simplify our analysis and understanding of this whole problem and concept that we're facing. So if we order them in this way, once again, the result will be exactly the same as in the previous sequences. But now what we can do is we can group them. We can look at them as pairs. We can say, all right, so what's the result of the first heads and tails? What's the result of second heads and tails? And so on. And that allows us to, instead of looking at the whole sequence as something general and trying to figure out what will happen in the long run in the whole sequence, we can just simply look at one pair of heads and tails and see what the result will be there. So in this case, for one pair of heads and tails, the result is 1.2 times 0.9, and then we can just multiply that pair as many times as it comes up. So in this case, our result will be $100 times whatever the result of a pair of heads and tails is, so 1.2 times 0.9, to the power of the number of those pairs. So in this case, we'll just say that there's n pairs. So that's the result again, and in that way, our analysis now is much more easier to do, because all we have to do is look at that underlined part. What is in those brackets? So depending on what we bet, what percentage of our account balance we bet, all we have to do is analyze what one heads times one tails will give us, and that way we will know in the long run are we going to win or are we going to lose, because all that's going to happen is that same result is going to be applied over and over and over again. Nothing will change significantly except for our actual account balance that this result is being applied to. Therefore, we just have to look at what will happen on one heads and one tails. Alright, I hope that all makes sense. That was a bit of preparation for us going forward in this section, just so that we know exactly what's happening. Because I've seen people explain the Kelly criterion before, and they just look at the heads and tails and just focus on that without explaining that order doesn't matter and that in the long run this same result will be just replicated over and over and over again. Now that we understand that, we will be able to analyze the Kelly criterion, and we will start in the next tutorial. I look forward to seeing you then, and until next time, happy trading.